One rural county here, more people have died from COVID-19 than in any other county in the state.
Exposure in Georgia is a worry, as a new study there finds 80% of COVID-19 patients who need hospitalization are African American.
New numbers out today show nearly 1.5 million Americans filed for unemployment last week.
I have no choice. I have to get back to work. If there was a choice, I would be closed still.
And those of us who have been in relatively good mental health may see the onset of new mental illnesses.
56% of people said worry or stress tied to these outbreaks have led to at least one negative effect on their well-being.
Many colleges and universities are planning to hold some, if not all, of their classes online this fall.
The pandemic has only broadened the inequities that already exist between students.
In spring break week, we served over 1,100 families in 1 week.
Those people who really care have really shown up.
It takes all of us really working together and coordinating together so that you see that continuum of services that the entire family needs.
Thank you all for joining us today. As we were reminded from that video, COVID-19 has increased the need for those in our communities to step up. There are many of you here doing just that. The response of civil society organizations during this time has been incredible, but to be successful, we rely on the generosity of others. That's what we're here to talk about today. I have two incredible experts on this subject that are going to talk about fundraising during the current climate. First, we have Ann Fitzgerald. Ann is the founder and president of AC Fitzgerald, where she serves as an advisor to dozens of nonprofits and funders. She holds a master's degree in philanthropic studies from Indiana University and brings nearly 3 decades of experience in sales, management, and fundraising. We're also joined by Tim Kuchuriak. Tim is the founder and chief innovation officer for Next After, a fundraising research lab consultancy and training institute. He's the author of the book, Optimize Your Fundraising, lead researcher and co-author of the online fundraising scorecard, Why Should I Give to You, and the Mid-Level Donor Crisis. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you,
Ann, to kick us off, Ann, can you tell us a little bit more about how you've seen the fundraising landscape change over the past year?
Well, thank you again, and I'm so delighted to be on this panel with Tim. Well, as we all know, we're doing this conference virtually, and so many organizations that have had galas or events have canceled, postponed them, or gone virtual. We're not able to meet face to face with our donors right now, and we're also dealing with a lot of virtual teams. Our fundraising teams are now working from their home offices. If we didn't have strong mobile or online ways for donors to give, we certainly need that now, because donors have now migrated more and more to the online giving platforms. So a lot has changed. I think organizations have had to pivot very much in the last few months this year on program side, and then dealing just with the business of running their nonprofits. Demand is up, but revenue is not always following suit.
Great. Yeah, and Tim, I know you've done a lot in the online giving space even before the pandemic. So what are some things that you're seeing?
Yeah, well, thanks, Kelly. It's great to be here. And I feel like we've done several of these things over the last couple of months together. So here we are again, little boxes on a screen. It's been interesting. So one of the things that we do at our company is we do these mystery donor studies where we go out and we'll subscribe to hundreds of different organizations at the same time. And then we monitor everything they send us, we analyze it, and then we give mystery gifts to the organizations and monitor how they continue to engage with us. So when COVID-19 really started to disrupt things and started to shut down businesses and and the economy, we said, how can we use some of this data that we're collecting? We have this like aggregate donor inbox that's constantly receiving emails from thousands of different nonprofit organizations. So what we did is we started to kind of visualize that and use the data to answer specific questions. One question that everybody had is, are nonprofits continuing to communicate with their donors during this time? What we found is that yes, in fact, they were, and in fact, in greater volume than they had in the past. Email volume from nonprofits to their donors has gone up significantly since the start of COVID-19. And then the other question that we wanted to answer is like, okay, well, what are they saying in their communications? Are they mentioning the coronavirus or pandemic or COVID-19 in their communications? At one point, up to 70% of all communications were mentioning COVID-19, coronavirus, or pandemic in the communications. So it was a topic that was right there in the middle of all of these conversations that were being had with the donors. It's been interesting to just see how that's changed over time. Now it's about 40% of communications mention COVID in some way. And the other question that everybody was asking is, well, gosh, are donors still responding? I mean, I know some people are dealing with loss of income or being furloughed, so we looked at some data, and what we found is that actually online giving is up 27% year over year. And the percentage of gifts that are coming in online has been growing. I'm looking at some data here. In October, 63% increase in online gifts compared to 2019. September, it was 56%, 67% in August. So not only has this shaped how nonprofits are communicating with their donors, but also how donors are responding.
Yeah, that's great. And just a reminder to our audience, you can type in the Q&A box at any point that you have any questions. So we do have a lot of people attending today who are nonprofit staff. If you could give them one piece of advice to increase their fundraising, what would that be? And Tim, we can start with you.
So I think the biggest thing is because there's so much, I guess, competition now in the inbox, how are you going to differentiate yourself and stand apart? And so like one thing that we actually have tested during this time, we actually tested it prior to COVID, is simply like making your communications a bit more human, more personal, more kind of not necessarily sending communications that look like they come from a marketing machine, but emails that look like they come from a human being. So just being more personal, more honest, more transparent, more vulnerable has led to actually increased response rates from what we've seen.
And how about you, Anne? What would you advise?
You know, I absolutely agree with what Tim said. I think nonprofits have to make sure they are reassuring their donors that they're still doing their job. If they keep saying, if your mission was important before, it's still important now. And we have to give our donors confidence that we're still carrying out our mission and that we're being accountable to the donor and to their gifts. I also think all nonprofits should look right now, especially to focusing on some of the major donors. Studies have shown that certainly there's some donors out there who have been less impacted by the pandemic and can give more. One study showed that 80% of all donors feel that they will give the same or more at the end of this year. So this seems like a real opportunity. And with time short, you might want to start by going to your very major and most loyal donors first.
No, that's encouraging to hear.
Yes, there are some silver linings. We're seeing some positive things.
Yeah. I think we also have some people on this call who are donors themselves. So what advice would you give to donors that want to be more strategic during this time and want to really increase their impact?
Yeah, I would start by asking questions. So one of the questions that a lot of donors are sending to a lot of groups that we're looking at is that they're asking, how are you going to adapt and continue to fulfill your mission in light of the changing environment and the changing circumstances we live in? So asking that question and just, being kind of part of the, the conversation with the organization, maybe even, engaging from that standpoint by just simply asking more questions.
And one thing, if I could add, is, I think donors, it's certainly a time to you always want to be strategic with your giving, right? You want to evaluate that well. But if you have organizations that you know well and you feel like they have been good stewards of your money, this may be the time to now say, let me figure out what I can do to help them. A year ago, you might have been giving to a certain program. Maybe it was an event, maybe it was something that was going on that just doesn't exist right now. And maybe this nonprofit needs something as simple as some masks and some, antiseptic for their staff. Be flexible as part of your strategic giving.
Yeah, that's great. Well, now that it's November, I know we're all starting to think about end of the year, which is a big fundraising time. What are some key things to keep in mind this year as we look towards end of the year fundraising?
Well, I'll say, go ahead, Tim.
Go ahead, Ann. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I guess, and this might sound a little harsh, but I'm going to tell you this, COVID is not an excuse. Okay. I mean, I think, we've all been hunkered down in our homes, and it's easy to get a little complacent. But I'll tell you this right now is that many nonprofits are meeting with donors face to face. They're outside, they're at coffee shops. So don't assume your donors don't want to meet. If you are comfortable meeting and you can do that outside and in a good area, then please reach out to your donors and ask if they want a meeting, because your competition is doing that. So, yes, things have changed. It's tough. There are challenges, but I think donors are still very much responding to a great pitch for support based on the relevancy and the impact of your work.
Yeah, and I would just add, and I'm probably biased, that if you haven't in the past really focused a lot of attention on online fundraising at year end, this is a tremendous opportunity for everybody. And again, because people are so much more plugged in, they've been trained to be more receptive to digital communications, because this is the world that we live in today. This is a great opportunity for you to really kind of start to move that ball forward and invest in building up a good year-end fundraising online campaign.
One other thing I could just add, Kelly, is that there's also, and it could influence or incentivize some donors, is that there are some provisions in the CARES Act that might encourage some donors to greatly increase their support because they can do that this year, and this provision might not be in place next year. And as well as even lower dollar donors who may not itemize on their taxes have the opportunity to write off $300 for a single person, $600 for a couple off their taxes, but even if they don't itemize. So, their techniques are not the main reason people give to you, but I certainly think that should be a nice reminder to some of your donors.
That is a great reminder. So Tim, for nonprofits that have never done online fundraising before, where would they begin? Are there tools you can point us to, or companies they should talk with? How do you get started?
I think the first thing would be work on building an email list, right? So the number one driver of all online fundraising is the size and quality of your email list. So you might say, well, how do I go about doing that? Well, if you're the type of organization that produces content, you can repurpose your content as a way to begin to build that email list. So that would be the first thing to focus on. And then the second thing to focus on would be start from December 31st and begin to work your way backwards, right? So I know that there's a lot of excitement around like Giving Tuesday, and a lot of people have a whole bunch of effort that they pour into that day. But what we see is that the bulk of giving really takes place between, December 26th and December 31st. So like start from the 31st and work your way backwards.
Similar question for you, Ann. Well, and if you have more thoughts, feel free to add them, but also in terms of major donor fundraising, if a nonprofit's newer in that space, how would they begin to start making some major donor asks?
Well, I heard a phrase the other day that says, fundraising happens at the speed of trust. So, you can't expect people to meet them and instantaneously they're going to make a major gift. It's oftentimes a progression. Sometimes through things like Tim's mentioning, where you cultivate that relationship online or through other methods, and they sort of end up raising their hand and giving more. But I would still say, you know, again, start with what you have. Start with your board members and your major donors and ask them to think about other people who might be interested in the mission, and ask them further if they'd make an introduction. It's small, but if let's say you have 6 board members and 6 of them make introductions for you, that could be, you know, some nice potential donors for you. So begin with what you have. Ask donors for that they're going to have like-minded friends. Ask them for those introductions as a starting point. And then I would just say is, if you already have smaller dollar donors on your list, email or direct mail, you want to make a pitch to upgrade their support and give them a reason to upgrade their support. So I think that should be part of your communication solicitation plan.
Yeah, that's great advice, Anne. And you're right. Like, as people start to have more conversations with like donors and friends of donors, like then the next question is, well, what do I say? What do I communicate? Like, how do I actually express the reasons why somebody should give? And I would have everybody really focus on trying to think of what is the best way to answer this one single question, which is, if I'm the ideal donor for your organization, why should I give to you rather than some other organization or not at all? The way that you answer that question really determines your organizational value proposition. And that is the number one thing, based on our research and our testing, that really moves the needle at not just getting people to respond, but the degree to which they respond. The size of the gift is really unlocked by, you know, how you answer that question. So that'll be something else for people to think about and prepare as they go into this fundraising season.
Yeah, and maybe I would just say that, you know, I think that's so true, that so many organizations, you know, you're running your nonprofit, you think we're so unique, and actually the first things donors think about when you explain something to them is, what are you like? They're not thinking about how you're different. They're thinking about what you're like. So creating that USP, that unique selling proposition for your nonprofit, is critical. Another way we like to position it sometimes is helping organizations think about, what is one of the biggest problems facing Georgia or facing the nation that you see, and then what are you doing to solve that problem? What is your nonprofit doing to solve that problem? So again, to what's unique about you, and what are you doing to address something donors care about?
Yeah. And obviously nonprofits have been forced to, we've all been forced to be a little bit creative in this season. What are some things you've seen groups do to be creative in their fundraising?
Well, I mean, I've seen a lot more virtual events taking place where, you know, it's not the same as like the gala where everybody comes and shows up and you have like this kind of captive audience for a period of time. So I've seen that some of these like virtual events are shorter in terms of like their length, and they're more kind of more produced, almost like it's almost like a almost edutainment type of thing, where there's, you know, some sort of kind of like today's conference, honestly, like, you know, we have a mix of kind of like interesting content, some challenging things, and then some things that actually are helpful to us in our work. So I think that's one thing I've seen that's been pretty interesting, and maybe here to stay even after everybody goes back to, you know, rubber chicken dinners.
The other thing I'm seeing is organizations embracing short videos like they never have before. So they're creating videos. You know, I think this is a great time to think about, how can we bring our mission to donors? Because our donors can't come to us, you know, through an event or something else. So, you know, how can we create that sort of personal experience and share that with video? Some organizations I've seen have done very nice little thank you videos. Just a short thing, a little clip of someone in the office sending a little donor thank you. And I think that personalization people really like, and they feel like they're getting to know the staff of the organization a little bit better. And I think that adds all to the relationship.
I know you mentioned how donors are still giving in this time. Granted, you both don't have a crystal ball, but I know a lot of people are more concerned looking into next year and uncertainties, and how do we prepare for some possibly uncertain, unstable economic times ahead?
Well, do you want to go, Tim? I can.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly difficult question to answer because, as you mentioned, we really don't have a crystal ball. I guess my encouragement to everybody would be, don't operate under the false assumption that, that people are going to stop giving. I mean, I have been absolutely just amazed and just excited by just the outpouring of generosity during this time. I think that the fact that we all are experiencing some level of like solidarity. We're all kind of experiencing this shared experience, which is very foreign to what we've had in the past. We're seeing stories every day of people suffering. I think that is really like kind of pricking the hearts of folks and saying, look, what can I do? Maybe I'm not suffering like my neighbor, but what can I do to help my neighbor? And I think that just staying the course and doing the things that you've consistently done to engage your supporters and inspire them to give is step number one.
I remember one nonprofit leader saying, we're not for profit, but we're also not for loss. So you're running a business, whether you like it or not. And so you have to think about being profitable in the nonprofit sense in your business. So, I think it's important to take a really clear look at your operation. I realized, back in 2008 during the recession, there were some lessons we all learned from that didn't always carry through. And one of the things I think every nonprofit has to think about right now is, have you built an operating reserve? And it's tough now because you're probably just hanging on by a thread. So it may not be the time to put money aside, but it's something I think you should be engaging your board with and having serious conversations about how can you set aside some operating money for whatever the next thing is, which we do not know what that is going to be. So I think this is a good time to think, put on your business hat and look at that. It is a tough time for a lot of nonprofits. Right now, across the country, about 1 million people in the nonprofit sector have lost their jobs, and they're not sure when they're coming back. So there's a lot of belt tightening. But I think it's a good time, certainly, to scrutinize that and be, pretty conservative. Have your big plans for, where you're going to go, but be conservative in your budgeting, and then really think about, can we pivot back to a greater scale, maybe in the spring, if we're at a point where things open up, we have a vaccine, and all these things are going on. Because the indicators are the economy's strong, it just needs to rebound. And that will open up new sources of funding as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, Anne. And actually, if you have an operating reserve and maybe you have done good things to prepare for a time such as this, ask the question, is now the time to actually invest in trying to grow my organization? So like, I know that there's several organizations back in 2008 and then early part of this, this kind of current crisis that said, maybe this is our opportunity to invest in acquisition and starting to actually grow our organization, because a lot of people have pulled back. There's less competition in the marketplace, and this creates an opportunity for us to really take advantage of that. So that's another way to kind of look at the, a challenging time as potentially an opportunity.
Very great. This has been helpful insight, and if people have questions, definitely take advantage of the Q&A box down below. So I know we also have some people listening in who serve on boards. As a board member, how can someone support a nonprofit organization during this time?
Well, board members, one of their, while they are not necessarily have to go out and do the fundraising, one of their key responsibilities is to ensure that there are sufficient financial resources. So I think this is a good time as a board member to ask the questions, and sometimes tough questions, of what is the health of this organization? And then what's the role that I can play as a board member? And I also sort of want to put some responsibility on the side of staff. I serve on 3 boards, and I attend a lot of board meetings in my profession, I think because they want to blame things on the consultants, so they bring me in. But still, the thing is, what I hear most on board meetings and board calls is where board members are saying, what do you expect of me? What do you want me to do? And they want to contribute, they want to be valuable to the organization, but they actually don't know how to best do that. So if you need your board members to engage more, to help you make introductions to other major donors, then do things that will make it easy for them to do that. Don't assume just because on their board, they're on your board, they know everything about your organization or even how to best talk about it to their peers or associates. So I think the board members have a responsibility now, but as collaborators with the board, staff has a responsibility too.
Yeah, great reminders. And we have some questions coming in. So a follow-up to the board question: is now a good time to recruit new board members? And do you have any thoughts about giving requirements for board members?
I think it's a great time to recruit board members. I mean, I think I like to always start with who's already engaged seriously in our organization. I think it's ideal if they're already giving, as opposed to getting someone who's never given a dime to become a board member. But, this is still a good time. And I think it has to go back to saying, what is it that you want or need board members to do? How do you want them to be engaged? But also, I think it's a time to present, I think, a very positive view of your organization, not like, well, we're just happy if someone gets on our board and we don't want to ask them to do too much. No, ask them to do things, and you'll attract the best. And that's what you want on your board. On the follow-up, I'll just say about the giving levels of board members. I see that with very established nonprofits. They might have a certain level. Organizations that are newer will often say things such as, we'd like you to make our organization one of your top 3 charitable priorities, or we'd like you to consider a significant gift. We won't tell you the exact amount.
Great. Another question: do you anticipate the generations coming up behind the World War II generation and the baby boomers to be as generous as their predecessors?
Well, with the wealth transfer that's starting to take place, Gen X and millennials are being positioned to potentially be the most generous generation in the history of the world. So the question is, how are we going to unleash that or unlock that in some way? And what you have to understand is that the differences in terms of generations is that people give for different reasons. Where maybe the boomers and the silent generation gave out of a sense of duty or responsibility. This is the right thing to do. Younger generations want to feel as though that they are part of the impact that's being made. They want to be engaged in some sort of way. So it's a little bit of a different type of way into that kind of giving conversation. But the answer to the question is yes. I think that there's tremendous potential and opportunity with the next generation.
And I think it's, Tim knows well about this, but I think also we got to think about how millennials, getting them engaged, and many are being philanthropic now, but also how they like to give. And, I think having a monthly giving program is very attractive many times to millennials. But we also, certainly on a board level, if you invite them to be part of your board, or if they're engaged in some other way, they're going to want to have a voice. It's not just, I'm going to write my check and go away.
We also have a question about direct mail. How should we be using direct mail during this time specifically, or in general?
Well, I would definitely pair it with any of your online activity. I mean, I think, first of all, I think you should be doing, if that's part of your fundraising work is direct mail, then by all means, you should be continuing it. We've seen very good results in direct mail across the board. If that's part of your one of the ways you're soliciting or acquiring new donors. And then I think you should also be thinking about how do you best match that up with any of your online activity. For example, organizations that are mailing are also then following up with an email, or they're sending in the email in advance saying, watch out for this yellow envelope that's coming. So just any ways that you can elevate response. But there's been some very strong response on the direct mail side as well.
Yeah, and direct mail is still the workhorse for how a lot of organizations raise money at scale. What I would suggest is that to take more of a digital first approach. So the way that many organizations have built their organizations, they would do direct mail acquisition, which is very risky, right? Because like you have to put a bunch of pieces in the mail and you have to hope that it works. Whereas with digital, you can do more kind of like rifle shots where you're testing small amounts of money first. You're refining your offer, you're acquiring a name or acquiring a donor, and then you can put them into the mail stream. And what we have found when we looked at data is that a donor who gives at least one gift online and one gift offline in a fiscal year is by far the most valuable donor of any other kind of segment of donor. So that point that Ann made about actually integrating between the two and having opportunities for your direct mail donors to hear from you online and your online donors to hear from you offline is a very, very important and powerful strategy.
I think that's also you got to think about as you're part of your year-end strategy is being as multi-channel as possible. What I usually try to do is break into segments the donors. And clearly the ones who are giving the most, they're going to get the most personalized attention. But think about what are you going to be doing in terms of direct mail, if that's part of your portfolio, email, phone calls, Zoom calls, all the pieces that you can put together to really touch as many donors personally as you can.
What books or resources would you recommend to somebody who's just getting into fundraising?
Well, there's lots of things out there. I always think for the clarity of the way he writes, any books by Jerry Panas, P-A-N-A-S is his last name. He's passed away, but he's written a number of books. I think mostly on the major gift side, but I think there's some very good ones out there that he's done.
Yeah, there's one.
And Tim, you should promote your own books. People should read your book.
yeah. I mean, if you want to go deep into the world of online fundraising and testing, but Dan Pallotta just wrote a new book. It's actually more for donors than it is for fundraisers. But I think that there's some value in both of them. Actually, I have it sitting right here. It's called the Everyday Philanthropist, and there's some really good stuff in here. It's really kind of like a quick read. There's simple little takeaways, but I found that to be really helpful just to kind of get a sense for actually, what's the interplay between the organization and the donor and the social impact that flows from the kind of like the partnership between those two. So that might be one just to take a look at if you're kind of getting started. It gets your mind thinking about that.
Yeah. Well, and I think also, if I could just add, as we're thinking about year end and, the activity that goes on, certainly we want to get donors' attention, but donors are not giving just because it's year end. So, I always say is you can certainly mention that it's year end and there's opportunities and, blah, blah, blah. But, they're giving because they're your mission and that they believe in your mission and that you're having impact with your mission. So I think the messaging is important. I see a lot of things people saying it's year end, time to give. And it's like, well, that is not the most compelling pitch I've ever heard. I think right now they're certainly with the election up in the air. There's a lot of distraction out there. So we have to kind of break through that a little bit. And in part, we have to always be thinking about our message and how we can make that relevant and timely to our donors.
That's a great point. The deadline of December 31st is the incentive. It is not the offer, right? So
right. I see a lot of people say, this is your last chance. I'm like, really? Like, if I don't give to you, you're never going to ask me again? I don't believe that. Last chance to give.
Promise? Yeah, right.
Well, I will add too that both Tim and Ann have some great resources available. I get both your emails and they're always helpful. So we actually, if you go to georgiaopportunity.org/donors, there's a way you can sign up and we'll make sure you get added to their list. So if any of our panelists want additional resources, or you can Google them and check out their websites. So,
can I just say one last thing? I know we were ending up, but this is a challenge. Certainly this whole year has been very weird and continues to be so. But don't give up. I think if anything, we want to give you some hope that fundraising is continuing. Donors are continuing to be generous. We are going to be adapting. We're going to continue to adapt as fundraisers, but we'll get past this. And the organizations that stay the course will continue to thrive and grow.
And yeah, and just as I guess a final word is, remember, people give to people, right? They don't give to websites, they don't give to direct mail campaigns, they don't give to any other type of vehicle or channel, but they give to people. And so the question is, like, how can you actually humanize the way that you relate to these people that are doing this wonderful thing, which is providing resources so that your organization can fulfill its mission? That's a partnership. It's a sacred partnership, and it's one that we need to really consider and take, not take for granted.
Well, great. Well, I know that I and others on this call have really learned a lot and appreciate your positivity and your optimism during this time. So thank you to Tim and Ann for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, if people want more information, they can go to georgiaopportunity.org/donors.